This is my dad's 1996 Camry, and in 2015 he bought it for $450 with the sole purpose of being a work car. In over 9 years, he really has done much maintenance on this. So, in this video, I'm gonna learn how to paint on it. Oh, you're not worried? Oh. This high schooler is going to learn how to paint on it. Now, I should tell you something. We had actually tried to repaint the hood on this before, using aerosol cans. To be honest, we actually didn't have any experience in painting, so that's why it looks like this at the moment.
Oh wait, I'm trying to film something.
Prior to filming this, a few weeks earlier we actually bought some equipment to try out. Now, by no means this is an educational video. This is more of a documentary of my process of learning how to paint. And all that is happening here is also still being done on somewhat of a conservative budget. Not to say that painting is hard, but you could still possibly do it. It just wouldn't be as easy without the necessary tools. And it goes without saying, everyone has to start something from somewhere. So this Camry is pretty much a perfect place for me to start before I can move on to something like the Supra. So the main goal for right now, learn how to paint and make this Camry a little more presentable for whenever my dad decides to drive this out in public. Now, this doesn't need to be a full restoration, but all it needs to look is just a little bit better than what it is right now. You see, this Camry is still a well-running and functioning car, and it only has 183,000 miles. So that's pretty decent. It just looks a little rough. So naturally, this is the perfect candidate for this project. Which now leads us to the question, where do we source our paint? After a little bit of looking around, we found a company called Sherwin-Williams, and it turns out they were actually nearby. So what we originally wanted to do was get the exact same paint code just to keep things simple. And sure enough, they were actually very happy to help out. Not only did they give us the exact color code and primer, what they recommended was a single stage, which, if you don't know what a single stage is a type of paint that combines both the base coat and clear coat in one step, which is way more cost effective than doing just base coat and clear coat separately, which is perfect for us because we don't have time to do that. And alongside with those things, they even gave us the mixing ratios, and along with some pretty straightforward instructions. And before we start anything, I'll give you a little quick run through of how mixing ratios work. And if you don't know where to get them, you should always ask the paint producer. They should be able to give you what you exactly need. And in our case, for our single stage, we'll be doing a 4:1 ratio. And we'll be following an order that should look like this. 4 parts of our single stage, 2 parts of reducer, and finally 1 part of hardener. And depending on how much you want, you should pour up to the corresponding numbers. So that way you'll have a perfect mix of everything. So let's say if I wanted the whole cup to be filled up, I'm going to pour the single stage till it reaches the first 5, and then pour our reducer until our level hits the next 5, and finally with our hardener up to the next 5. And the same thing is going to go for our primer, except it's just 2 components. And for our primer, it's just a 4:1 ratio. 4 parts primer, 1 part hardener. So now that that's all out of the way, we can now move on to our first step, which is doing prep work. This is where we're going to sand down our soon-to-be painted area, making sure that we have a nice level surface for the primer to lay on top. And if you're going to do this type of stuff, make sure you at least have some sort of respirator, because the last thing you want is a shortened lifespan. And besides, you're 5 times better with it on than not having it on at all. So, don't cheap out on safety equipment. It's better to be safe than sorry. So, if you're wondering, I'm not really going to strip this down to bare metal. All this really needs to be is just somewhat smooth. So when we go to spray primer, it looks somewhat uniform all around. After I was done sanding the whole thing down and knocking most of what was the old paint and clear coat off, I went back and looked through the whole hood and found some still uneven spots. So I just went in with a 80 grit piece of sanding paper, smoothed out the spots that were uneven, and then sanded around it with a 100 grit to blend it in. And after rinsing off all the old dust, I finished it up with a 400 grit just to smooth everything out. And this was what I was left with. And after doing that, we decided to do the whole car. So that was what we did the next day. Gave it some minor fixes with some Bondo and bumping out some dents. And finally giving it one last rinse before moving the car into the garage. Once we brought it in, we finally gave it one quick wipe down with some panel prep and then quickly masking it up. And now we're finally ready for primer. So pretty much same thing mentioned before. It's a 4:1 ratio, 4 parts primer, 1 part hardener. We'll just be filling up to the number 4 line since we don't have that much big of a cup. Now once this is all mixed, we only have about 45 minutes until this completely hardens. Realistically, it should take me like a couple minutes, but as when I started, I was a little nervous and didn't really have much of a smooth start, but this is just primer, so I can get away with some things with it. Really, this is actually my first time spraying anything. Honestly, I'm excited to work on more projects, either maybe the 200ZX, Supra, or the other ones, whatever I might work on. If you want to see those, you can stay around on the channel for a bit. Go ahead and subscribe or like this video. So since I started out doing this, I would recommend probably, if you can, take off the bumper or whatever. It makes things a lot more manageable and it doesn't hurt your back too much. If you're able to do it, I would do it. But if you just want to leave things on, just heads up, you might want to prepare yourself for a lot of like maneuvering around. Also, another thing I did notice when spraying, these guns can get pretty hefty if you're spraying for a little bit longer times. You do get some wear on your shoulders and maybe your arms, especially when you're getting into a lower position or getting up close or farther. Just any weird contortions you have to do with your body, it takes a lot of effort to do. So this type of stuff, it's not easy as it looks. And with about 15 to 20-ish minutes, we were pretty much done with the primer. Obviously, there are some imperfections like this dent over here, but it was worse before, so that's not really much of a concern to us anymore. We also have a couple of runs of primer. It's nothing too bad since we're still going to have to sand this down with 400 grit. But overall, I call this a great success, and we're just going to quickly move through the sanding process of this. So I sanded it down with a 400 grit since the spray of the gun doesn't really let out a smooth finish, so in the end you still probably need to sand it. And once the whole car was sanded down, it was time for us to move on to our paint. So as mentioned before, this is our single stage, which will be following a 4:1 ratio. 4 parts of our single stage, 2 parts of reducer, and 1 part of our hardener. And once that is all mixed up, you just start spraying. And the magic of single stage is it just comes out glossy. Now, we only have enough paint to do exactly 3 coats for the car. And if you look close enough, I'm actually making a pretty big mistake here. Obviously, I'm not consistent at all, being a first-time painter. But I'm also spraying at an angle instead of being parallel to the surface that I'm painting on, which you can see causes streaks. Now this only really affected me when I was spraying the hood and the roof. Everywhere else is pretty much vertical, so obviously there wasn't much of an error there, but these things can still be a little bit better. So once we're finished with our first coat of our single stage, you can see where I messed up on the hood and the roof, but everywhere else seemed to be passable. But hey, nobody's perfect on the first start, so nothing too much to beat myself up about. Now I didn't record for the next 2 coats since we need more focus on painting than actually filming. But on the second coat I was able to correct my mistakes and somewhat hide up the streaks a little bit better. And also I let my dad do the mirrors, and actually it didn't turn out too bad. There was a big drip on the right hand mirror, but it's no big deal. These are just mirrors anyway. And now onto our third and final coat. You can see that our hood is a little bit better. Overall, the streaks aren't as noticeable, but it does look better than a rattle can job, so I'd say this is a pretty good turnout for this car. And as I said earlier in this video, this car only needs to look a little bit more presentable. Also, another thing to look at is this respirator that I used when painting. You can see how much of the particles it picked up and the dust too. Really important to have. Alright, so we're pretty much done with this whole entire car. We've already done 3 coats of single stage. We're now pretty much going to assemble everything back together. So we're going to be taking off this plastic wrap and stuff, and we're going to be putting everything back together. So in the end, I think this came out to be an overall success, and I definitely think this car really needed the new paint job. And if you made it to the end of this video, please go ahead and subscribe, maybe like this video. If you want to see more, I will definitely do it in the future. For now, I guess, enjoy your day.